Pick up the bar of soap sitting by your sink right now. Turn it over. Read what is printed on the back in that small gray type nobody actually reads. Sodium tallowate, sodium palmate, sodium cocoate, maybe sodium chloride, glycerin, fragrance, a dye listed only by a number. A string of names that sound like they came out of a laboratory, because in a sense they did. Even though the actual substance behind most of those names is something far simpler and older than the label makes it sound. And you paid somewhere between $4 and $7 for that single bar. A bar that, in a house with 2 or 3 people washing their hands and faces and bodies every day, lasts perhaps 3 weeks before it is worn down to a sliver too thin to hold. Multiply that out. Every bathroom in your house, every month of the year, every member of your family. It adds up to a real number by the end of a year, spent on something that, underneath the manufactured name and the plastic wrapper and the embossed logo, is one of the oldest and simplest chemical transformations human beings have ever discovered and put to use. Now I want you to sit with something. My wife has made every single bar of soap this family has used for as long as we have been married, from 3 plain ingredients, a process that the Romans understood, that medieval households practiced by the fireplace, that every farm in this county relied on before there was a store shelf to buy a bar from instead. Fat, water, 1 mineral. Combined in the right proportion, with the right care, and left alone for several weeks, they transform into something that cleans as well as anything sold in a store, costs a fraction of the price, and contains nothing you cannot pronounce. My name is Silas Miller. I am Amish, and I farm this land in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Today I am going to show you exactly what those 3 ingredients are, exactly how the chemistry works. Because once you understand the reaction, the whole process stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling like simple cooking. The full method my wife uses from start to finish, and the honest safety conversation about the one ingredient in this recipe that absolutely demands your full attention and respect. I will not hide that part from you or soften it. It matters too much. Let me start with the chemistry, because this is genuinely one of the most elegant reactions in all of household chemistry, and once you see it, you will never look at a bar of soap the same way again. Fat, whether it comes from an animal, like the beef tallow my wife uses, or from a plant, like olive oil or coconut oil, is built from large molecules called triglycerides. Picture 3 long fatty acid chains attached to a central glycerol backbone, like 3 long ropes tied to a central post. That structure is stable. It does not want to come apart on its own. It is why fat sits in a jar for months without changing. Lye, sodium hydroxide, a strong alkaline mineral, is the only thing that can reliably break that structure apart at the temperatures and equipment available in an ordinary kitchen. When lye dissolved in water meets fat, under gentle heat and with steady stirring, it attacks the bond holding those 3 fatty acid ropes to the central glycerol post. One by one, the ropes come loose. Each freed fatty acid chain immediately combines with a piece of the sodium from the lye, and that combination, a fatty acid bonded to sodium, is, quite simply, soap. The glycerol backbone comes free as well, and it does not go to waste. It remains in the mixture as glycerin, a natural moisturizing compound that is, ironically, often stripped out of commercial soap and sold separately at a premium, then sometimes added back in to more expensive lotions. This reaction has a name. Chemists call it Saponification, from the Latin word for soap. It is not a mixture. It is not fat and lye sitting next to each other. It is a true chemical transformation. The lye is consumed entirely in the process, broken down and rebuilt into something new. And what comes out the other side, after the reaction completes and the soap cures, contains no lye at all. I want to say that plainly and clearly because it is the single most common fear people have about this process, and it deserves a direct answer. Properly made soap that has cured for the full time contains zero free lye. The chemistry consumes it completely. What remains is soap, and only soap. Now let me give you the 3 ingredients plainly so you can write them down. The first is tallow, rendered beef fat. My wife renders her own from beef fat trimmings, a process I will describe in a moment. But you can also buy rendered tallow at many grocery stores, or order it, and either is perfectly fine for this recipe. Tallow makes a hard, long-lasting bar with a gentle, creamy lather. It is the traditional base for soap across most of history in temperate climates, because it was simply what was available. Every family that raised or butchered cattle had fat to render, and rendering it into soap was the only sensible thing to do with it, rather than letting it go to waste. The second is lye, sodium hydroxide, sold in pure form at hardware stores in the drain cleaner aisle, or ordered specifically labeled for soap making, which I recommend because some hardware store lye products contain additives you do not want in soap meant for skin. Read the label and make sure it says 100% sodium hydroxide with nothing else listed. The third is water, plain water, though some soap makers substitute milk for part or all of the water for a creamier bar. We will keep it simple with plain water for this recipe, since milk requires additional care to prevent scorching during the reaction, and that is a refinement for after you have made a few successful batches, the simple way. That is the whole ingredient list: tallow, lye, water. Under $15 total for a batch that yields somewhere between 8 and 12 bars, depending on the size of your mold. And most of the tallow you can render yourself from beef fat that many butchers will give you for free or for a few dollars, since it is often considered a byproduct they are happy to part with. Now, before I walk through the process, I need to stop and be completely honest about lye, because there are folks on the internet who breeze past this part to make the recipe sound friendlier than it is. And I will not do that to you. Lye is a strong alkaline chemical. In its dry crystal form, and in its dissolved liquid form before it has reacted with the fat, it is genuinely caustic. It will burn your skin on contact, sometimes without immediate pain, which is part of what makes it dangerous. You may not feel the burn until real damage has already begun. It will damage your eyes seriously and quickly if it splashes into them. It releases fumes when first dissolved in water that you should not breathe directly, which is why this work happens in a well-ventilated space, ideally with a window open or outdoors, and never in a closed bathroom or small space with the door shut. The safety rules are not complicated, but they are not optional, and I want you to hear them as firm requirements, not friendly suggestions. Wear rubber or latex gloves the entire time you handle lye, whether it is dry or dissolved in water. Wear eye protection, real safety glasses or goggles, not your regular eyeglasses. Work in a well-ventilated area. Always add the lye to the water, never the water to the lye. Pouring water onto dry lye crystals can cause a violent, sputtering reaction that throws caustic liquid outward. while adding lye gradually to a larger volume of water is controlled and predictable. Keep children and pets entirely out of the room during the mixing process. Have a container of vinegar within reach the entire time you work, because vinegar neutralizes lye on contact, and if any of it touches your skin despite your gloves, you flood the area immediately with cool water first, and then with vinegar. Never use aluminum containers or utensils, since lye reacts with aluminum and can release dangerous gas. Stick to stainless steel, glass, or heavy-duty plastic specifically rated for lye use. Treated with this level of care, soap making is no more dangerous than careful work with any strong household chemical, and it has been done safely in countless farmhouse kitchens for centuries. Treated carelessly, it can hurt you badly. I tell you this not to frighten you away from trying it, but because honest is more useful than impressive, and I would rather you be properly careful than casually confident. Now let me walk you through the actual process, the way my wife does it. If you are rendering your own tallow rather than buying it pre-rendered, start by cutting beef fat trimmings into small chunks and melting them slowly in a heavy pot over low heat, never high heat, which scorches the fat and gives the finished soap an unpleasant smell. Once fully melted, strain the liquid fat through a few layers of cheesecloth to remove any solid bits, then let it cool and solidify. For an especially pure, mild-smelling tallow, some soap makers melt it a second time with an equal part of water. Simmer briefly, let it cool until the fat hardens on top and can be lifted off cleanly, leaving behind any remaining impurities in the water below. This second step is optional, but worthwhile if you want the gentlest, least beefy-smelling bar. For the soap itself, measure your tallow and melt it gently in a large, heavy pot over low heat until fully liquid. Then set it aside to cool to around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. While the tallow cools, put on your gloves and eye protection, and in a separate heat-safe container, glass or stainless steel, never aluminum, measure your water. Working in your well-ventilated space, slowly sprinkle the lye into the water, never the reverse, stirring gently and continuously with a non-metal spoon as you go. The mixture will heat up quickly on its own, sometimes up to 200 degrees, and release noticeable fumes for the first minute or two. Set this lye water aside, away from children and pets, and let it cool to roughly the same temperature as your tallow, around 100 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. This cooling period typically takes 15 to 20 minutes for each container. Once both the tallow and the lye water are at a matching, moderate temperature, slowly pour the lye water into the tallow. Again, lye into fat, following the same safe pouring principle, while stirring steadily. You can stir by hand with a sturdy spoon, which is the traditional way and simply takes longer, or use a stick blender on its lowest setting to speed the process considerably, which is what most soap makers today prefer. Continue mixing until the mixture reaches what soap makers call trace, a stage where it has thickened to the consistency of a thin pudding or custard, and if you drizzle a bit of it across the surface from the spoon, the drizzle holds its shape for a moment before sinking back in, leaving a faint trace. This can take anywhere from a few minutes with a stick blender to up to an hour with hand stirring alone. Once you reach trace, pour the mixture into your mold. A simple wooden box lined with wax paper works perfectly, or a silicone loaf mold if you have one. Tap the mold gently on the counter to release any trapped air bubbles. Cover it loosely and wrap it in a towel or blanket to hold the heat in, which helps the saponification reaction complete fully and evenly. Leave it completely undisturbed for at least 24 hours. After that first day, you can unmold the soap and cut it into bars. though it will still feel somewhat soft and slightly warm. This is normal. The true chemical reaction, the saponification itself, completes within the first 1 to 2 days. But the bars need a much longer curing period after that, typically 4 to 6 weeks, set on a rack in a cool, dry place, turned occasionally for excess water to evaporate out and for the bar to harden into the long-lasting form you actually want to use. This curing time is the part that tests patience, and it is also the part most people rush or skip, which leads to a soft, fast-dissolving bar that does not perform the way it should. Now, the honest limits, because I will not let you believe this does everything a store bar does. A plain tallow soap with no additives is a wonderful, gentle, effective cleansing bar. It is genuinely excellent for everyday washing, hands, body, face for most people. Because there is no manufactured fragrance and no synthetic dye, it tends to be far gentler on sensitive skin than many commercial bars. And many families who struggle with skin irritation from store soap find real relief switching to a simple tallow bar. What it does not do, at least not without additional ingredients, is produce the thick, billowing lather that commercial soaps are engineered to create. Commercial soap makers add specific ingredients to maximize foam, because foam has been marketed to consumers as a sign of effectiveness, even though lather and cleaning power are not the same thing at all. A plain tallow bar lathers modestly and cleans thoroughly. If a big, foamy lather matters to you for the experience of it, adding a small amount of coconut oil to the recipe, replacing perhaps 20% of the tallow, boosts the lather significantly while keeping the bar simple and recognizable. It also will not smell like anything in particular unless you add a few drops of essential oil at the trace stage, which many soap makers do for a pleasant, natural scent without resorting to synthetic fragrance. Plain tallow soap has a very faint, clean smell of its own, slightly waxy, not unpleasant, but not perfumed either. And the curing time is real and should not be skipped. A bar used too early, before the 4 to 6 week cure, will dissolve quickly in the shower and will not last nearly as long as a properly cured bar. The patience is part of the recipe, the same way patience is part of any good bread or any good cheese. You cannot rush the chemistry, and you should not try. Now I want to take a moment, because this is the part that matters most. Think about what soap actually is, underneath the marketing. It is fat and lye, transformed by a chemical reaction that has been understood and used by ordinary households for thousands of years. The Romans made it. Pioneer families on the American frontier made it from wood ash lye and rendered fat because it was the only soap available to them. Every farmhouse in this county made its own soap as a matter of course well into the last century. And then, within the span of a single generation, the soap industry did something remarkably effective. It took a thing every household could make for almost nothing, gave it brand names and embossed logos, and manufactured fragrances, packaged it in plastic, and convinced an entire country that soap was a product to be purchased rather than a simple chemical process anyone could perform in their own kitchen. The ingredient list with the unfamiliar chemical names is not dishonest exactly. Sodium tallowate is, after all, the correct chemical name for what you get when you saponify tallow, which is precisely what we have just walked through making. But naming it that way, in a laboratory dialect rather than plain language, makes a simple thing sound complicated, and a complicated-sounding thing is much easier to sell at a markup for years on end. There is no advertising budget behind a bar of soap you made yourself from $15 of tallow and lye. There is no quarterly earnings report tied to your household switching back to making your own. The knowledge simply stopped being passed down because there was no longer any money in teaching it, and a generation or two later, most people genuinely believe that making soap from scratch must be a complicated, even dangerous specialty skill, rather than what it actually is. A simple, ancient chemical reaction that, treated with proper respect and care, any patient adult can perform safely in their own kitchen. My wife did not learn this from a book or class. She learned it the way her mother learned it, standing at the same stove, stirring the same kind of pot, watching for the same trace. It has cost this family almost nothing in soap for our entire marriage, and every bar we have used has had exactly 3 ingredients in it, every one of which I could explain to you in a single sentence. So here is what I want you to do. And I want to be realistic about the pace of it, because this is not a same-day project the way some of my other videos have been. This week, source your ingredients. Find tallow, render your own from beef fat a butcher will likely give you for little or nothing, or buy it pre-rendered. Order or buy pure sodium hydroxide lye, specifically labeled for soap making. Gather your safety equipment, gloves, eye protection, a well-ventilated space, vinegar within reach. Read through the full process once more before you begin, so every step is familiar before you start. Then, when you are ready, set aside a quiet afternoon, follow the safety steps without shortcuts, and make your first batch. Let it cure the full 4 to 6 weeks. And when you finally wash your hands with that first bar you made yourself, come back and tell me in the comments below what it was like. Your first time. What surprised you? Whether the lye intimidated you the way it intimidates most people at first. I read every single comment, and the stories from people trying this for the first time, the small mistakes and the things that went right, are exactly what helps the next person trying it after you. Next time, since we have been talking about what goes into the things we use every day, I am going to show you how my wife makes our toothpaste from scratch. 3 simple ingredients again: no fluoride, no foaming agents, no plastic tube, the same way her mother and grandmother made it. And the honest truth about what it can and cannot do compared to the store-bought kind. It is a short, simple video, and it is the natural next step after today. Until then, gather your 3 ingredients, respect the lye, be patient with the cure, and remember, the people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.